Has this ever happened to you? You've been working on a new Shapecast design to make a new slip casting mold, and you open it in your slicer and, oh no, it's too big, it doesn't fit. Hi, I'm Kent. I'm going to show you how you can print some Shapecast molds that are too big for your printer. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. So this here is the big bowl I have up on Shapecast. It's the Flexa Orbis. Holds about 24 ounces. And to make this bowl, you need a mold this big. And of course, the mold is much bigger than the bowl. That's for a couple of different reasons. One is we have to account for clay shrinkage. My clay shrinkage is 13%, so we need to scale up the inner mold by that much. We then need to add a space for the slip well. That isn't strictly necessary, but it's really convenient to have. And then we actually need space for the plaster as well. And with the Shapecast molds, I basically have about 25 millimeters or 1 inch of plaster all the way around. While this bowl isn't huge, the plaster molds do get big relatively fast. And of course, to 3D print a mold for this, we need all the pieces for that. And that's what those are. So I went through my archive and pulled out some of my old molds. This one here is the inner mold for this bowl exactly. It defines the vessel shape itself. Basically fits down right here. And then Shapecast also replaces coddle boards, and to do that we need a bottom ring and the outer molds. Mix our plaster, pour it in, demold it, pull all the pieces out, and we get a mold just like this. Shapecast has the option for splitting up the outer pieces, and that's for two different reasons. One is to deal with this annoying thing of the mold pieces getting big and not fitting on your printer, but there's another reason as well. And in particular, it has to deal with demolding the plaster. So we need to be able to disassemble the mold from around the plaster, and if this were in one piece, it'd be very hard. Even this mold here as 2 pieces, while it fit on my printer, it probably would have been better to print in 4 pieces. Likewise for the ring, it can come in multiple pieces. However, this one we can attach together permanently. So I've actually super glued this together because I don't need to be able to remove it. Pulling it off the plaster is relatively easy because it comes straight off. These, however, hug the side of the plaster and we need to be able to remove them more easily. And for those that are looking closely, this is actually my old mold design, but it's true for this new Shapecast mold as well. So when you create a Shapecast mold, you'll get the inner piece. You'll get 2 different options for the outer mold. You'll get either halves or quarters. And you'll get 3 options for the ring. You'll get either a full piece, halves, or quarters. The ring gets glued together. We assemble the outer mold using binder clips to temporarily secure it. We then take off the binder clips once the mold's set and pull everything out. Occasionally people will reach out and ask about options for splitting the inner mold, and I've responded kind of one at a time, but I figured it'd be good to make a video about it. You don't actually need a feature in Shapecast to do this. We need to be able to split the outer mold in Shapecast because we need to be able to have these features to assemble and disassemble it. And because the rings get so big so fast, I also added that in as a default capability, but I don't have any provisions for splitting the inner mold. Or likewise, sometimes even the outer molds get too big. So here's another form. This is the Flexa Filia. And while it's not very wide, it is much more tall. And so for instance, if you have a bamboo A1 mini, this won't fit. The inner mold will fit and the ring will fit, but the outer mold won't fit. It's too tall. And last but not least, the handle molds can also get too big. This base plate here can grow depending upon the size of the handle you have, and it may be too large for your printer as well. So how can you fix this? How can we print these molds on a printer that's relatively small? Here I've set up Bamboo Studio, so it's an A1 mini. So this has a print bed that's 180 millimeters cubed. And this is the same bowl. This is the inner mold, and you'll notice that it's too big. So one of the simplest things to do is to go ahead and use the scale feature and say, I want this, say, 175, and then all of a sudden it fits. However, I do not recommend doing this. I think this is the wrong way to do it. In particular, all of the grooves that are inside the mold itself also shrink down. You might be able to get away with this and not have the mold leak, but I spent a fair bit of time trying to get these sized just right. And for the handles, I definitely don't recommend it because these walls are very thin and there's some very fine features. And as soon as you start changing the sizes on things, it's likely to mess up. And of course, that also is changing the size of your pot as well, which probably isn't what you want. So what's the right thing to do? So let's start with a different mold that's a little bit easier. Let's work on this one here. All right, so here are all the mold pieces. This is the one you can download as is from Shapecast. It already has all of the files for you. Now, the inner mold fits just fine, so it fits inside the print volume, no problem. The quad ring works okay. Of course, we want 4 of these. We can auto arrange everything. All right, great. So we got 4 copies. We got the inner mold, but the problem is the outer mold is still too big. So we can see that it's too tall. So it's 191.54, which is taller than our 180. So how can we deal with that? Well, the answer is we can actually cut it. So here's the cut tool. And you can cut on basically an arbitrary axis. And so this shows the 2 pieces that'll be cut. You can drag it up and down. And I'm just going to pick an arbitrary place to cut it. We can perform the cut. Now we can arrange all the pieces again. And put them over here. And now you can see that they fit. So now it's only 104 millimeters tall and 87. So this will print just fine. Of course, you'll want to clone this as well so you can make multiple copies. You'll need 3 more copies just like the ring. And to print this one, I'd recommend turning on the brim just because there isn't much here to support it. We can go ahead and slice this one and slice just fine. And we can go ahead and print it out. Once you've printed out, you can then super glue it together just like you do with the ring pieces. So this one I printed in 1 piece, but you'll get 4 pieces that you can assemble. And basically you can use some super glue, put between all the joints, push it together, and turn it into 1 ring. Or likewise for the 2 halves, instead of having one, basically put some super glue around that seam, put it together. You'll want to make sure that there isn't extra super glue on the grooves and ridges because that's what prevents the plaster from leaking. And if you're worried about things leaking, maybe the first time you do this, you can go ahead and use tuck tape to reinforce that joint. If you made a bunch of these molds, you probably have a good sense of what leaks and what doesn't. Basically, you want to make sure you mix your plaster well, and you don't want it too watery. Basically, the stronger you mix it, the harder it gets. It'll start to get a little bit thick. These molds are not watertight, but they are intended to be plaster tight. Water is more runny, and it can leak through the joints, but the plaster, usually by the time it's done mixing, is usually viscous enough it doesn't leak through the joints. But again, tape is a good backup if you're worried about it at all. So this is the easiest case. It's when the outer mold is too big. So let's try another design. This is the Flexa Era. So this is the bowl that's a little bit smaller than the one I showed. The quad fits no problem, the outer mold fits, but the inner mold is too big. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete these so they're out of our way. And if we look, it's just a little bit too big. So it's basically 222 millimeters. So we can again use our cut tool. Only this time we don't want to cut vertically, we want to cut horizontally. So we can go ahead and rotate the cut plane around, perform the cut. All right, now it's okay one direction, it's too big the other direction. So we can do it again. Cut that way, and cut this one. Go ahead and arrange all the parts. And now they all fit. And again, you'll have to go ahead and super glue all of these edges together, and you want to be careful with the ring. This works, but you'll have a seam to deal with in your pot. So you probably will wind up wanting to prime it, just like I did with this one. That'll smooth out the layer lines, but if you have that seam running all the way across and all the way across, you can prime and sand it back. And that will help deal with the seam, or you just deal with the seam in the clay, either way. However, for this one, there's also another option. So let's go ahead and put it back together. So you'll notice that the body of the vessel actually fits in the printer, and it's really just the slip well that's a problem. So we can cut this a different way. So let's cut it. Again, I want to cut it vertically. But instead of cutting it down the middle, I'm going to slice off just the edge of the slip well. Right there. So you can see I cut off the edge of the slip well. Let me do this a couple more times. All right, and we end up with something like this. So now the inner mold fits just barely onto the printer. It's 174 millimeters across. So we got a little bit of margin there. And I've sliced off these 4 pieces. You'll need to be careful which one's which since I didn't slice it evenly. We can print these separately, and now later you can glue on just the slip well pieces. So going back to the real world, basically what we did is we cut it just like this, so we could then super glue that back on. What that has done is it means the seam now is in the slip well. So we'll have a joint, but the joint's over here in the slip well, and it won't actually impact the face of our pot. So we have some more pieces to glue together, but we don't need to worry about the seam so much. We want to make sure everything's aligned, but it won't impact the quality of our pot. So if it's just a little bit too big, you can go ahead and try slicing off the slip well like that. Then finally for this one, which is definitely too big, so here we can see that we are slicing off part of the body, so here we'd have to cut it into 4 pieces like I just showed. So cut it vertically. Again. We should be able to arrange everything. And now it all fit. So even on a relatively small printer like the A1 Mini, you can actually print these big molds. All right, and let's do a handle that's too big as well. So this one here is the Avo 90 by 45. We can go ahead and try and arrange everything, and it's going to complain. Basically the only thing that fits the inner handle mold. So let's start with the bottom plate. So we can see this one, again, is just a little bit too big. So it is 187, so we're just a little bit too big. So of course we could go ahead and cut it down the middle, just like before. Now we have 2 different parts, and those will both print okay. The problem is we're now cutting through the handle features itself, and again, getting super glue in here could be a little bit problematic. It might mess with how things fit together. Since this one's just a little bit too big, we can actually cut it on the edge. So let's go ahead and cut it vertically. Well, instead of in the middle, I'm going to go cut it way over here. So I'm just going to cut off just that much. So perform the cut. So now that one fits on the plate okay. This one we can actually go ahead and rotate. And we can get it on the same build plate. Now that'll print just fine. So basically we've cut it way over here. And so this over here is just plaster. It's there really just for support and to absorb the water. And so we can just glue on that slice right there without it really impacting it. You want to make sure things are flush so that the mold seats together. But if it's slightly misaligned or there's a little bit of a bump there, it should be fine. Of course, we had the same problem with the outer pieces, these walls. They're also too long. So that's these two. Of course, we could cut these. However, one other thing to do is try printing things on the diagonal. So I'm going to rotate this one 45 degrees and go ahead and position it, and it fits. This one over here, just like that. So now no more complaining, it all fits, and even these we don't have to super glue together. If it were a little bit bigger, it wouldn't fit on the diagonal, but it's definitely another thing to try. If you rotate the part, you might be able to get it to fit on the print bed. And I made one more example. I showed when the print's too wide. You can actually do the same thing if the inner mold's too tall as well. So imagine I'm doing a tall vase, and I have a form kind of like this, and again, it's too big. So we click on it. So it's 176 wide, so it fits in our 180 bounds, but now it's 216 tall. So we do like this one, what we do with the outer mold, we go ahead and slice it. We can kind of pick where we want it. This one, I don't think it matters too much. Perform the cut. Go ahead and have things placed, and now it'll fit. You'll have to super glue this part here to this bottom part here, but now you can get the mold to print. Of course, what you'll have now is a seam right here, and then you'll probably want to sand it and maybe prime it to get rid of that seam or to smooth it back. So there you go. There's how you can use your slicer to go ahead and print things that are too big. And that's basically why I don't have it as a feature inside of Shapecast, because the slicer can do this. And it really depends upon your own specific printer and your print bed size. There are also trade-offs in where you want to put that seam, so you can decide what makes sense for you. You could possibly do some other things to help hide the seam. So this is a straight, flat wall, but for instance, if you had some texture, like it stepped down a little bit, you could put the seam right where one of those steps were. Again, like this is only one piece mold, so it can only step in, but potentially there are features in your pot where you can pick an arbitrary place. Or maybe you have a foot and just the foot's a little bit too big, or you slice again through the slip well and cut part of that off. A bigger printer does make things easier, but it's definitely not a requirement. And if you even had a really tiny printer, you could go ahead and keep cutting things up. You can cut them into an arbitrary number of pieces. At some point, you have a lot of gluing together to do and a lot of smoothing out, but you can actually go ahead and create these molds with just a little bit more work. Another thing to keep in mind is if you're outsourcing your printing, you want to pay attention to how big their print bed size is. So for instance, if you cross from like a smaller printer into a larger printer, they might charge more for larger print volumes. So it may be advantageous to go ahead and slice up your mold before you send it off to be printed. So you could then have them print it in more pieces, but because those pieces are smaller, they might charge you a lower rate because they can use the smaller printer. And even if you have a larger printer, you might need to do this. For instance, I've been thinking about making a larger planter, and it even won't fit on my printer, and I'll have to do some of these same techniques to go ahead and slice it apart. So don't let your print bed hold you back. Go ahead and use your slicer and cut things up. Don't scale them, but you can slice them apart. Hope you found that interesting. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.